Bluegrass Airport is an American aviation story. Its remarkable history has been chronicled through a series of oral history interviews. We're speaking with Betty Murphy, owner-operator of Avis Rent-A-Car at Bluegrass Airport for over 50 years. Her late husband and business partner, Wendell Murphy, was co-founder of the Aviation Museum of Kentucky. Betty, have you heard any stories about the old airstrips prior to Bluegrass Field?
I came to Lexington in 1955, and I believe the airport started in 46. Is that right? Well, if not, you can get the right date. But so anything, before that, I don't know anything about. Sure. So I knew the old terminal building, which we call the Cracker Box, and that was really, you could put it in one wing of this place.
Are there any favorite stories that your husband liked to tell?
Well, it would refer back to car rental. I mean, one of the things he told when he got started in the car rental business, and then we started an air freight company about the same time. And his favorite story, which is the truth, I don't know if you're familiar or not, but he was legally blind after a few years. He had retinitis pigmentosa, and so he was going through the airlines because everybody could get behind the counters and it was all friendly, and of course it's friendly now, but you're not permitted to go, as free as we did then. And he found this box on the floor, and he bumped it and he said, "What's this?" And it happened to be a box going to Irving Air Chute on Versailles Road, which is now Pepsi-Cola. So he said, "Well, I'm going to town to get my car serviced. I'll just drop it off." So that was his story of how he got in the air freight business, along with the car rental. But it really was true that he did that. But no, we had 3 airlines at the time, Piedmont, Delta, and Eastern. And of course, just 2 car rentals, Hertz and Avis, and then later on National moved in. But and we went through several managers. I think the first one I ever knew was Mr. Phillips. I called him Shaky. And Ms. Hecox, his secretary. And then we went through a Mr. Bailey and let's see, Mike Flack, and of course we got Eric now, which is really good. And the previous one I really would not like to comment about. Other than the fact that I knew nothing was going on. I would always attend the board meetings and everything was above board, and then all this came out, and I guess I was more shocked than anybody by attending the board meetings. But we're on the right track now, I think. I just attended as being a concessionaire, and we were free to do that as part of the public, which it is open to the public. Oh, I thought of something else that it's going to mix up. Wendell started. Every Halloween, we'd always give out apples. So some of the pilots from the airlines, especially Piedmont, because our counter was right next to Piedmont, and the pilots would come in and get us some apples, and they called me Apple Betty. But we did that for years and years, up until this year, and I decided to give candy instead of apples. That's one thing he did. Very creative mind. And I'm sorry about that too, because when the airport, he was a big instigator in getting this airport started, and bless his heart, he passed away before the grand opening, and he really didn't get to see that or be a part of it. But he was a really different person too, real outgoing, real involved in the community. But I remember several of the employees that worked at the different airlines. There was Jim Strauss and Dan Hale at Delta, and then there were 2 sisters, Virginia Black and Carolyn Montgomery, that worked at Piedmont, and then Jim Neal and Bill Heflin. There were 4 of the ones that I remember. And then over at Eastern, there was Chuck Buxton, Charles Buxton, he was the manager, and then Hugh Ramsey and Bob Cole. Bob Cole would be another one you could contact. He is pretty ill health right now, but I'm sure his mind goes back to all that.
Talk about your observations of the airport as it evolved into its present form from Little Bluegrass Field. Was it gradual, or was there a moment when you thought, wow, this has changed?
Well, I don't really remember when they tore the old building down. Of course, we were in here, and the configuration downstairs is different. The car rentals were on the left side, where you go through security and where the restaurant is, and then the parking lot was altogether different. There was no parking garage. It was public parking on the ground only. But it just seemed to kind of go gradually, as I best remember. Actually, my husband started the car rental, or bought the franchise in 1956, and he moved in the terminal in 57. So, and then we married in 59. So after that, I came out and helped him on weekends at the counter. So I guess I've been here a few years.
How about special moments, like visits from royalty or presidents? Do you recall those?
Well, I was not here to see the Queen, other than just on TV. I did have the occasion to, when President George W. Bush, the first President Bush, came in. I guess he was campaigning at the time, and I was able to shake his hand, which was kind of thrilling. I remember when John Kennedy was running, and at that time the Hertz manager was a real big Democrat, and he drove a convertible through town with John Kennedy, who then was president, on that convertible. I remember seeing him, but I never did see the Queen in person. I don't believe he came through the airport, but he was in Lexington. He might have, I don't know. Of course, everybody came through the main terminal, but where now they go to TAC Air, or one of the fixed base operators.
Tell us about when the Wildcats won the NCAA back in 1978.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. A lot of damage. They climbed on our counter, and you couldn't do anything with them, and threw things and spilled things, and I don't know what would happen now if we won. Of course, they probably wouldn't come through here. It would be over at TAC Air or one of the others. Oh yeah, that was exciting.
Do you remember when they opened the new terminal?
Not really. We moved. Of course, at the other old airport, everything was no computers much, and rented cars on handwritten, and reservations through teletype instead of through the res centers. But then when we came over here, of course, we had the computers and so forth. But I don't really remember, actually what happened, other than it took time to move. Just like when we moved in the counter space we are now. You have to do all your computer wiring change and so forth. But the airport is growing. One thing I hate to see, though, that we've become what you call a regional jet airport rather than having the bigger planes. And I know it costs money to operate empty, and I'm sure that they want to fill all the planes, but I've always wondered, well, you fill the smaller ones, why don't you think you need bigger ones? But that's why I'm not president of an airline, I guess.
Do you recall when the Concorde SST came?
I remember, yeah. They didn't let anybody on it, I don't think. Some of the people that gas the planes would describe it to you. It's very plain inside, so they said. Nothing to, I'd say, write home about. And it seemed like I remember it was either Mrs. Wright from Calumet or one of the big officials at Calumet that paid for their employees to fly back to England on that thing. And I guess at that time it was expensive then. I don't even remember what year it was when it came in, but I do remember it being out here.
Betty, talk about Wendell co-founding the Aviation Museum of Kentucky.
Yeah, he and George Gumbert, of course, they always talk about flying stories. And they thought it would be good to get a group of people that were interested in aviation to form a club. And so it came out maybe 10, 15 members, and it was called the Aviation Roundtable. So it grew and grew. I helped take reservations and pick up their menus for them at the time, and it kept growing and growing. And so then we were looking for a place to have a meeting rather than, we'd always have dinner meetings when we had our meetings at different hotels, mostly Spindletop. And then as it got bigger, and then we got the museum where Tyke area is now, we started having our Hall of Fame in there. But I think we have now maybe 200-300 members, something like that. Not all active, just a name on a roll, like a lot of people, but yeah, that really grew, and he would be really pleased to know where the museum is now, because they ran out of space out there, and in the other hangar. Yeah, he was always interested in promoting and doing things. He was the thinker in the family. I told him he did the thinking and I did the work, the manual labors. But yeah, he would have been a good one to really go back a long way. He worked for Bowmer Flying Service. I don't know if you remember, they pronounced it Burmer, I think, but as a line boy, gas and planes and that. And then Mr. Burmer had the Avis franchise, and Wendell said, well, I've got a used car. If you rent your cars out, can I, rent mine? He said, well, yeah. Of course, wasn't nothing really legal about it because he didn't have the right to do that, but that's how he got started. And Mr. Burmer said, well, I'm tired of it. I don't want to fool with it anymore. So Wendell bought the franchise from him as a co-owner, and that's how he got started with used cars.
Did Wendell talk about why he became interested in flying all those years ago?
No, he I guess it's one of those things. Of course, he didn't know at the time what his eye problem was. He just knew he wore glasses, but he took flying lessons and learned to solo, and I never did fly with him because his eyesight got, progressively worse. But he just was always interested in it. And another thing he liked was collecting old cars. And I have a kind of a storage building now with about 10 or 15 of them in there that I don't know what I'm going to do with. But something funny about that, when he was in service, these people would call and said, well, Miss Murphy said, what are we going to do with this old car I've got in your garage? She said, what old car? Well, your son bought it and stored it there. So she sold all of those cars while he was in service. That didn't go over so well with Mama, but anyway, after that, he still continued to try to collect older cars. No, she didn't even know he had the old cars, and he stored them in these people's garage while he was in service. Then they would call him wanting the rent, and she didn't even know about them, so in that case, she would sell the cars. Yeah, that was back, I don't know. I think he was in service maybe in the early 50s, late 49 and 50. In fact, he went to Admiral Farragut Academy, and he graduated from there, and then he was at Henry Clay, and he was kind of in between years. So we went to a couple of reunions, not knowing which class he was in, so we'd go to two of them.
You mentioned some of the other people you both worked with.
He did with Mr. Burmer, and now there was another company called Bluegrass Aeromotive. Now, I don't remember who owned that, but a fellow that worked for him, Chico Bush. Chico was his nickname. I don't even know his real name. Bush was the one that we dealt with. And that was located about where Autotech is now in the airport.
Sam Wheat talked about the old cars with no air conditioning and air conditioning you could lock off. Tell us about changes in the rental car business.
Customers come in and complain, your air conditioner doesn't work. Well, you didn't pay your $1 extra to have it. Yeah, and Avis had so many owners. I mean, we've had, I don't know how many different owners, and of course they changed the presidents and everything, but of course now it's Avis and Budget, or Avis Budget Group they call themselves. But yeah, it's been a lot of changes, and the cars nowadays are really complicated, I think. And I was talking to my fleet man yesterday. I don't understand how some of the customers can, because we don't tell them, how to operate the different controls, and sometimes it's hard to even find how to turn a radio on. And he said he didn't understand either how the customers could find it. If you've ever rented cars lately, you know what I'm talking about. They're all so different. One thing that I remember in the car rental, which really doesn't pertain to the airport other than he came in, George Humphrey, who used to be Secretary of Treasury, was one of our customers. And he always liked the Chevrolets. And one time he was coming in, and I had one that was due to check in, and it hadn't checked in. I said, all I have now is a Volkswagen convertible. He said, well, I've never driven one. Maybe I'd like to try it. But said, when you get that Impala in, be sure and call me. So he did. He rented that, and I can see the man now sitting in there with the top down, his hat on, and flying around the parking lot. But we had a pretty good relationship with he and his wife. They had a farm out on Ironworks Pike. And every derby we'd go visit them and take them some strawberries and some candy. And that was one of the people I'd almost forgotten to mention, Mr. George. But and then we also had somehow Wendell found out they were making the movie here, April Love, with Pat Boone, and I believe Shirley Jones was in it. And we rented several cars to him, and we had to go to Cincinnati to get a convertible for Pat Boone to drive, because we didn't have convertibles at the time. And then there was another movie, Flim Flam Man, I believe, with George C. Scott. We'd rented some cars, to them. And we had, not a whole fleet of them. We couldn't provide all the cars because we didn't have that many. But there's some notable things.
Tell us about the film industry here in the Bluegrass.
Okay, Raintree County was Montgomery Cliff and Elizabeth Taylor. Of course, the April Love we know was Pat Boone and Shirley Jones. George C. Scott was in Flim Flam Man, and then there was trying to think of another movie that we had some, but it's off the top of my head right now. But there was another one. I remember where the Baptist College is down the road. It used to be the, can't think of the name of the motel. There was a motel before, and they stayed there, and it was about old cars. And it seemed like Tony Curtis was in that one. I'm not sure, and I can't think of the name of the movie. But, when you look back on it, there have been several movies around this area that people forget about. Of course, I guess they had their own private planes. I don't guess they flew commercial. I hate to see the fact, too, that Cincinnati has downsized so much, from the hub to what it was, because that's affected our airport. And also Southwest, of course, they merged with U.S. Air? No, AirTran. And we were hoping we could get some of the Southwest fares out of here, so I don't know. At the last board meeting, Eric said that he didn't know how that was going. They were going to be making a decision, I think, until sometime this year as to whether they were going to lower the fares or keep them what AirTran had before. But all that affects our airport and the car rentals, too, because we depend on customers coming in. But I don't know. I've always felt like that the airlines tried to grow too big too quick. And, you kind of have to, we always said, watch your money if you're going to take on another company or something. But there's so many mergers now that, and even with banks, I don't like that myself, but I don't rule it. One thing I think I mentioned to you about if we could get Mr. Whit Hawkins, who was a line boy here at Delta, and he lives in Florida now, and he worked his way up to different positions and became president of Delta. And we were fortunate to go to his retirement party in Atlanta, and then that's when Mr. Ron Allen took over as president of Delta. But he would be a good one.
Did you meet Story Musgrave?
Yeah, he spoke at the Hall of Fame this year. He remembered Wendell because we talked to him. We reserved a car for him when he came in, and I know he asked one of the Aviation Museum people if the blind man was still here, because he remembered talking to Wendell, and he was really a go-getter too. He had a book, and he brought his own pens and books, and he had it all set up on a table to sell books to people the first time he was here.
Would you talk about 9/11?
Tragedy thing for us. We had cars all over the country. In fact, I had a little pickup truck wind up in Alaska, and we had to sell it because they wanted $500 to get it to Seattle and then to get it back here, so we just wound up selling it up there. But that was tragic. I wasn't acquainted with anybody personally that was killed in that, but you know, it really affected everybody. And if you've been to Ground Zero, which they're redoing now, it gives you kind of an eerie feeling, really. It did me when my daughter and I were there 2 or 3 years ago. But I don't know. It just, and I saw it on TV when it happened that morning. I was watching Today's Show, and they said, "Oh, a plane's crashed into the towers, and here come another one," and then, of course, it all blossomed up of that.
Any thoughts about the equine industry and its impact on the airport?
Yeah, that's a good boost to business. Of course, like anything else in the economy, the horse industry kind of went downhill, and we know, and also the big thing now is trying to get casinos here, which I've got mixed emotions about that. I don't want to be another Las Vegas with a casino sitting around, but I know that a lot of money is leaving Kentucky, and a lot of the horses. I kind of hate to see all of our good breeding stock go out of the country, because I feel like we lose a lot. And then they'll come back here and they're not the same. But that's a boost for business, and I'm sure it is for the airport too, because all these people fly in here. A lot of them, of course, they will go into Cincinnati or Louisville too. But I don't want to ever see us lose the horse business. And I'm glad that they come up with limiting certain areas how far out you can build, because it seems like anybody that has an acre of land, they want to build something on it, and I'm not for that. We've got to have some breathing room, preserve our bluegrass.
Are you still involved in the Aviation Museum of Kentucky?
Well, I couldn't pick up where Wendell left off, but I tried to. I'm on the Board of Trustees, and I help donate financially some what I can, because they, everybody needs money. And then I help with the Hall of Fame every year. But it's grown a lot too. I'm real pleased with it. And the camp that they have every summer, that's really taken off, and they have to turn people away because so many people want to be involved in it. And I think the biggest problem is having instructors, that can teach. But that has expanded from just the 3 or 4 camps here. They've gone to Louisville didn't accept it. Up in eastern Kentucky, and I don't know how many, I've forgotten how many they've had during the summer, but that's really grown. Getting people interested, the little kids interested in flying, and maybe make a career out of it when they get out of school. You always need pilots.
Wendell was a collector.
1927 truck from Jack, and that didn't have any curtains or anything on it. And of course, Wendell didn't cover it up, and it's really a mess. But that's one person he got from, and he bought a Cadillac limousine from a black funeral home here in Lexington. Whatever it did that, I don't know. And it's just I think there's about 14 cars there. He had a Bantam. Ever heard of Bantam? Did you ever hear of an Isetta? There's a fella here at the airport that was on the security, wants me to sell him one of those because he bought one and he needs some parts on it. And then when I said, well, I think I'll sell it, my daughter says, well, you might want to keep it. We might want to do something with it. I said, I don't think you want to do anything with it. It was a type car that it looked like it had 3 wheels. It was 2 wide ones here, and then the back ones were close together. The headlights looked like a bug going down the road. And when you opened the door opened like this, and the steering wheel came out on the door. That's one car I never did learn to drive.
Any closing thoughts, Betty?
When after we married, and I worked out here until 1964, I guess, and then we hired a girl to take the counter, and she called me one day, says, "You're not going to believe what this woman asked me." She says, "Can I use your counter to change my baby's diaper?" That's the way people were, really. You never would believe the questions they would ask you.